You have myself, Alan James. It's Open Your Mind Radio on Sunday the 1st of June 2014. Unfortunately, Steve isn't with us tonight. He's actually holding the baby, literally. I know he's tuning in and listening to the show, so good evening, Steve. How are you doing? So you just have myself, and I'll be going through a few bits and pieces as usual before we bring the guest on. A guest on the show tonight is a chap called Piers Corbyn from weatheraction.com. And they're world leaders in long-range weather and climate forecasting. And with all this global warming that's going on, or global cooling, you know, there's loads of arguments on both sides. We don't know what's going on, so we thought we'd ask one of the experts to come on and tell us what's going on. So Piers is going to be coming on in a few minutes' time. But first and foremost, we'll go over to find out, we'll ask Mary what the communication channels are.
The communication channels are email info@oymireland.com, by phone 046 927 1212, and you can also contact us direct through the OYM chat room.
Okay, if you want to call in, that's 046 927 1212. I won't be able to get to the email, unfortunately, because it's on the other computer, which is on the opposite end of the studio, so I won't be there. But if you want to phone in, or we have the chat room, you can go to oymradio.com, click on the chat, and you can also jump on the chat on People's Internet Radio. We're going to be we're being rebroadcasted there, thanks to Vin. Just have one or two issues with the encoder, which we'll sort out during the week, and then we'll get that sorted. So let's crack on. Anyway, there's a few things on the list that we just want to talk about before we get our guest on. Now, you probably heard during the week that there was a bit of bad news. I think it was over in Galway. There was about 5 suicides that the Irish Independent reported, and they're not related, obviously. They're just, again, part of the economy, what's going on, people having enough and just saying, that's it, you know, I'm not taking any more. And it's just so sad to hear stuff like that, when you hear, like, you know, people are taking their life. I mean, Ireland, there's so many suicides going on at the moment, all because of what's going on with the banks. And obviously new bills coming out. We know about the water charges, and now they're going to be talking about the sewage charges. They're talking about that next. And it's just getting ridiculous, and, you know, it's just getting madness, you know. Just to let you know, there's just Ty there on the chat room, wants to know who's on the show, is Piers Corbyn, Weather Action. We'll be talking to Piers shortly in a few minutes. So just bad news about that, really. But again, we had an email, or not so much an email, but one mention on the YouTube video, I think, about, again, we had James Gordon Gananocho on the show a few weeks ago. And James had pretty open-minded information, and we did say on the show, make sure you have an open mind, because there's going to be stuff coming down the line from James, Gordon James, and he's going to be talking about stuff. And again, people are saying, you know, well, if you have people like that on your show, it's going to affect your reputation. Well, look, we've said it time and time again, and kind of fed up saying it, really. Look, we're called Open Your Mind for a reason, okay? And that means that open your mind to everything. It doesn't mean you have to accept it. But if you entertain the thought, I mean, Aristotle said, the mark of an educated mind is to be able to entertain the thought without accepting it, okay? So if you can entertain it, I mean, he says something. We're not saying that we agree with him, but we can entertain the thought and think, well, you know, that's interesting. Let's go off and do more research and find out what's going on. Okay? That's just basically what it boils down to. Okay, now the other thing, that loads of things happened during the week regarding the water charges and water meters. I won't go into the massive, you know, what happened. It's a long, long subject. But basically, again, we had the Land Registry confirming that the boundaries go out to the centre of the road. Now, last week we had emails from a few posts on the chat facility showing us the Land Registry mapping, and only kind of showed the property. So I contacted Land Registry and I said, if you're saying the boundary is going out to the centre of the road, why is it on the online map that it's only showing it to the wall of my property? And they said they only show the property, they don't show the boundary. Okay, so the Land Registry map will only show your property and not the boundary. So then Steve raised a relevant question, and he said, well, what do we mean by boundary? What do we mean? How do we define boundary? does boundary mean that we owned it, or boundary mean that somebody owns it, like the council owned it, or, well, in my case, the council don't own it because they haven't taken over the estate. So we need to define what the boundary means compared to the property, and if that comes under our remit. But I did have we did have the water meters installers. They came on the estate again. While I'm talking about the subject, I might as well talk about it. They came on the estate again, and they blatantly ignored their revoked implied right of access. And to cut a long story short, without going into too much detail, the water meter installer, I said he's to leave the estate. He called the supervisor around. His supervisor tried to open up my shore to install a meter. I stood in it, excuse me, and said he wasn't going to, install a shore. He said he'd go off and call the police. Now, I said fair enough, and I was waiting there for about an hour for the police to come, and there's no sign of them. And then I remembered what Harry said last week. He said reverse the headache. So what I did is I called the police, the Gardaí, and I asked the police to come out. I said there's a bit of an issue here with the installation people from Irish Water, and the police came out, and I had a chat with them, and I showed them the relevant paperwork to say, this is not taken over by the council. It's an unmanaged estate, so they've no right to be in here. And even though I showed them the evidence, they kind of said, well, just accept it. It's going to come in anyway. And I thought, well, at the moment, I'm in the right. If the law changes in 2 years' time, fine. But at the moment, I'm in the right. So anyway, I think the Irish water meter guy, the supervisor, was pretending to call the police, because when the guards did turn up, he had a look of shock on his face. So they had to talk with me, and then they had to talk with him. And after they had to talk with him, he left. And I said, well, what's the story? They said, look, they're fed up being called out all the time to people regarding these water meters. They're fed up with it because they've better things to be doing. And I said, listen, I agree with you. I wasn't arguing with him. I said, I agree with you. So he said, look, it's a civil matter. And I said, so what happens if? He said, look, no ifs, it's a civil matter. That's it. So he said, I'll call you later. He said, I'm going to go off to talk to my sergeant. I'll call you later and confirm that. So fair enough. A couple of hours later, got a phone call from the guard. He said, I spoke to my sergeant. It's a civil matter. End of. Okay? So it's not so much what he said, it's what he didn't say. And basically, if you go out and sit in a chair over the shore, and an Irish water meter guy comes up and pushes you off or tries to get you off, that's assault. Okay? So, there you go. It's a civil matter. End of story. So, anyway, the good news about it is that out of 52 houses in my estate, as far as I know, I'm the only one that doesn't have a water meter. So that's the good news. So it allowed me time to get a letter off to Irish Water stating the fact that if they do actually put one in when I'm not around, that there will be a €2,000 fine, which I'll claim in small claims court, and I'll invoice them, for the removal, storage, and disposal of the actual meter. That's basically what I've done. So that letter's gone off to Irish Water, and I like some documentation to kind of back it up. But obviously I'll be aiming not to pay it like most people in the country. That's the plan of attack. Anyway, okay, moving on from that. The department, I was listening to John Moore during the week. John Moore radio show, libertyman.com I think is the website. If you go onto YouTube and type John Moore, he does a show over there. John was on our show last year, and we'll probably get him back on again. And he said that he's just announced that through his contacts, again, keep an open mind to this, he said the Department of Defense in the US is frantically getting ready for an EMP, electromagnetic pulse attack, on the US. Alright, now we've heard this before, but apparently they're trying to push this forward and have an EMP attack, and probably blame it on a coronal mass ejection or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. But if you check the John Moore show out from last week, he actually talks about it. Is it going to happen? Is it happening? I don't know. I'm just, letting people know. And again, for some people might turn around and go, oh, that's fear-mongering. Well, if you see that, if you perceive the data, if you perceive this information as fear, well then of course it's fear, because you're perceiving it as fear. If you believe it to be fear, I just see it as what it is. It's information. Do with it what you will. But that's the way I see it. Excuse me, I have a little bit of frog in my throat. But that's all I see. That's the way I perceive it. It's basically just information. That's all. I mean, we've heard loads of stuff, loads of things, loads of predictions. People are saying this, that, and the other over the years, and nothing has happened. So, if you want to ignore. That's fine, no problem at all. Now, normally what we do is go to Alan's week and Steve's week, but as Steve is not here, as I say, he's holding the baby. I know he's logged on the chat room there, and hopefully he's tuning in and listening in. So quickly go off to my week and then we bring the guest in. This week has been a mad week. Apart from all the hoo-ha with the Irish water installers and all that kind of stuff, I had a meeting with, some of you probably remember Tony Farrell, who is the ex-police intelligence analyst, the whistleblower, and John Anthony Hill, otherwise known as Mudeeb. Well, I had a meeting with the two of them this week. Very, very interesting meeting. Great chat with them. And their plans and what they're working on at the moment. So we're going to aim to try and get the two of them on, or at least Mudeeb on, and talk about what he's planning to do, what he wants to do. And so that should be a good show. Just seeing what else that we have here. Yes, there's also another radio station that's coming online shortly in America. We got a request from a lady on our Facebook who is very in tune with what's going on, and she wants to set up a radio show, so we're going to help her out there and get it up and running. So hopefully we'll have her on our show, and she can tell us all about what she's going to be doing, which is going to be quite interesting. And then last thing on the list is a big thanks from Vin. Vin kindly jumped on. One of our listeners, I won't mention any names for data protection and all that, had an issue there, and it's something that we didn't know about, we couldn't answer. So Vin kindly jumped in, and we had a three-way conversation, and hopefully the listener's gone off and applied the solution as what Vin gave him, and we'll see how that goes, and hopefully let us know what's going on. We still haven't had the chocolate in from Dr. Rima Lebo yet. We're still waiting on that. It's just been shipped recently, so our fingers crossed, hopefully that will come in. And so we have another project in the pipeline with Dr. Rima Lebo, but we're not going to talk about it yet because there's a few things that we have to sort out first. So that's the plan of attack. Anyway, so okay, what we do is we get our guest on. Now, you also know, we've heard an awful lot about climate change and all that kind of stuff, global warming, the carbon tax, they're trying to tax us. What's going on with the planet? There's so many things going on. There's sinkholes, there's flooding, loads of stuff going on. So myself and Steve said, right, we need to get an expert on who can talk about this, who knows about this, and this is their business. And the chap we have on, Piers Corbyn, well, I believe he's an expert. I believe the experts go to him. This is what we've been told on our research. So why not get that kind of quality guest on and talk about weather conditions and see what's going on. So we'd like to bring our guest in. Good afternoon, Piers. How are you doing?
It's great to be here.
Great. Listen, thanks a lot for coming on to the show. Much appreciated.
No problem.
As you probably mentioned, you probably heard me talking there, with everything going on with global climate change and everything else, it's all mad, and we obviously wanted to get somebody on to talk about it. So can you tell us a bit about your background and weatheraction.com and what you do and your expertise and stuff before we get into it?
Sure. I'm a physicist and astrophysicist. I went to Imperial College London, did physics, and later on did solid state physics, in fact, and then after that did astrophysics and studied solar activity. And later I was trying to relate the solar activity to the weather and thought that, in fact, I should investigate that as to how solar activity, that means particles and magnetic effects from the sun, how those affect the weather and whether it's possible to predict weather changes based on what we think the sun is going to do. and after a lot of work found that it is possible, and we are doing it.
Okay, and where does it tie in? We obviously know there's other weather companies probably contact you. How does that work out?
Well, we're the only forecasters that have a successful method of long-range forecasting. All the others use something entirely different. Namely, they look at the Earth's weather systems as they are and see how they're moving, and then project that forward in time using computers and hope that the result will give a forecast. But those methods do not work. As you know, the Met Office in Britain was predicting various stages in the past, like 2007, 2008, 2009. They were predicting what they call barbecue summers. And we predicted, no, there's going to be floods, and more floods. Well, as you know, there were more floods.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they have a belief in some sort of carbon dioxide influence and CO2's going up, therefore it's bound to get warmer or drier or whatever they were saying. And of course that is complete nonsense. It's not true. And everything they said turned out to be false. And in fact, the world is cooling.
Well, okay, this is the second time we've heard about this. We had a guest on called Stuart Strudlow, and Stuart told us on an interview that we did with him that he also agrees with that synopsis that the world is actually cooling. Now, we're seeing things like hearing about Greenland melting and the Antarctic melting. Now, based on that fact, you'd assume that there's some kind of heating going on or some kind of global warming because there's melting going on. How does that work?
Well, it's not true, of course, that there's more ice in the world than there used to be. There's actually, it is true there's more ice in the world than there used to be. It's not true that it's melting. The Antarctic has been increasing the amount of ice for the last, since measurements began, about 50 years ago. The Arctic has been fluctuating, and there have been meltings and there have been unmeltings. And now we seem to be in a period of increasing ice, or starting to increase ice in the Arctic as well as in the Antarctic. Now, historically, when there's been periods of climate change in the world, the southern hemisphere generally leads the changes, and changes happen first there and then later in the northern hemisphere, and that is what is happening now. There's a world cooling setting in, and it's evidenced very clearly in the Antarctic, and is now being also evidenced in the northern hemisphere, and will soon have more of an effect on the actual ice in the Arctic.
Okay, so what's the game plan then if they're telling everybody that it's heating up?
Well, they have a belief that CO2 is doing it. They've no evidence for that, but they believe that is the case, and of course they've turned it into a political activity. Namely, if people believe that's the case, then they can control their energy consumption, tax them more for producing carbon dioxide, make them pay more for energy, and introduce all sorts of gains, which again involving more control of people and making money out of it. So the banks love anything which involves money, so they will invest in carbon trading. The oil companies, despite what the global warmers tell us, actually love this stuff, and you just have to look on any of their websites. They are firm believers, officially they're believers in man-made climate change because it helps them put up oil prices. And that means what was in the ground not worth very much is now worth billions. And they carry on with a general scenario of high energy costs. Now, of course, we say this is very dangerous. Because since the world is cooling, actually, energy is going to be needed more, and the economies are going to be very damaged by these burdens of building wind farms, which produce very little of use and cost a huge amount of money to produce any electricity. Those sort of burdens have to be stopped, and we have to go for cheap energy, not expensive energy. We have to go for cheap food, not expensive food. Whereas the global warmers want expensive food, expensive energy, taxation, and generally a reduction in living standards. Okay,
so obviously you kind of hit the nail on the head. The carbon tax fiasco, all that, global warming. Again, it's all about revenue and making money.
Absolutely.
And you have this chap, who's the American chap who was going around convincing everybody there was global warming?
Well, Al Gore, you mean?
Al Gore, yeah, that's right, yeah.
He's a conman, a liar, and a thief.
Well, apparently I heard that Al Gore was telling everybody that the sea levels are going to be rising. Well, we hear that from other sources, but for different reasons. But he went out and bought a beachside house. At the same time, he was telling people not to be doing it.
That's right, absolutely. Well, he probably got the prices down by scaring them and then bought some properties by the sea.
Yeah, what a great way to do it. Now, these wind farms, we've had issues over here with the wind farms. They were planning to put them in, and the general plan where I live anyway, out in the country, they were planning to put them in, and the energy would have been shipped over to the UK, not even for Ireland.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously for the moment they've put a halt on the wind farms for whatever reason. The contract didn't go through, and so everything's put a hold on. But there has been zoning taking place for the wind farms, so that's probably still going ahead anyway. So
it should be opposed, absolutely. We call them prayer wheels. And I know people in the industry, and they've said very clearly to me, these things they're not built to last. They're mostly going to fall over or run into serious problems after about 5 years. And they're very expensive to produce and produce expensive energy. And a lot of them are built for political purposes, and the politicians who built them will be out of the way in 5 years' time when they collapse. And then everyone will be pointing at everyone else saying, we never done it.
So they're kicking the ball down the road again.
It's a scam upon a scam.
And have you gone, I mean, I don't know the state of play with wind farms over in the UK. How saturated is the UK with wind farms at the moment? Well,
it's getting a bit saturated in places, but the opposition is mounting, and there's very massive opposition in places. And I've heard, this is on the internet recently, that in France, I think it's in France, that burglars have been climbing up wind farms and stealing the copper off them and stopping them working, which I have to say is a good idea.
Well, it's a pity that they put them up in the first place.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely. But there's much better use for copper than building that sort of nonsense. I mean, there's plenty of electrical machinery that needs copper. Well,
we have the technology out there to not need these wind farms anyway in the first place.
Yes. Well, the idea that they are making energy security is another thing, which is untrue, because you see, a wind farm doesn't produce electricity when there's no wind. Now, the coldest parts of the year are in the winter when there's cold, high pressure and there's no wind. So when you want energy where you most need it, the wind farm will not be there to help. So that means you've got to have a backup of coal-fired power station or gas-fired or whatever. Well, if you're relying on those things, then of course it defeats the object, because you've got to have your coal-fired power station ready and waiting. And if it's ready and waiting, then it's not been used half the year, which again is a stupid waste of a resource. So why build it and not use it? I mean, that is just mad.
So let's just clarify that. When we need the energy, the wind farms won't work because of the weather conditions.
Yeah. The coldest weather conditions in winter are when it's high pressure, cold high pressure, with northern or eastern winds, for example, in Britain and Ireland. And that means there'll be very little wind.
Right, that just kind of reminds me of how the banks work.
2010, Britain, if it was relying on wind power and Ireland as well, would have millions would have frozen to death.
It just reminds me of the way the banks work. They give you an umbrella when it's sunny, and when it's raining, they take it off you.
Absolutely. Yes, that's when they want your money.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I mean, I know there's been a lot of people opposing the wind farms, and, you know, the general consensus, because there was planning not too far away from me, where I live at the moment, to put some wind farms up. And
that's a creation of the countryside. They're a monstrosity.
Well, yeah, they're an eyesore for one. They reduce the value of your property, because nobody wants to be living near a wind farm. But the other thing I heard as well through the grapevine, and it was a barrister that this came from, was the fact that the farmers were signing up to a contract to obviously, you know, to agree to have these on their land, and that means the land had to change its status, which meant that when the farmer passed on the land down the line to his family, he'd have to pay inheritance tax, which they didn't realise they had to do because of the land changing its status.
Oh, okay. So there's some deal in the small print to give the state more power over the future of the...
I think there's something... Yeah, I think there's something in it where, I mean, I'm only using this as a guess.
It would make a lot of sense, yeah.
Yeah, as a guess. Say they have agricultural land, right, and they can hand that down to their family because you can't have property on it because it's agricultural, so maybe there's no property tax on that, right? So they changed it. So when you put a wind farm in, they have to change the status because now there's something on the land. So
or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then when that land gets passed down, hey, there you go. They're going to have to pay property tax because the status of the land has changed. Now the farmers didn't actually. The farmers over here who signed the contract were not told this and didn't know it, and they've just found out about it.
Right.
Now, so does that mean, now we always talk about the law on Open Your Mind Radio, and we talk about contracts being, a written or verbal agreement by two or more people that has to be fully transparent. Now, if they got the farmers to sign a contract and they were not fully transparent in telling them this, then that means that contract would be basically null and void.
Well, it would be null and void, yes, if in fact information was deliberately withheld. But you see, these organisations play little tricks. They say things like, "Oh yeah, the full legal information is available on the website, blah 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 blah." So if you don't look on there and go through the small print, they say, "Oh well, you didn't look. Ignorance of the law is no defence." End of story.
Yeah, and of course, how many farmers do you know would have the internet and know how to use a computer? Or
they don't like pissing around on the internet. They prefer to, ask me what's the weather going to be, Mr. Corbin, and they'll read the report, obviously, but they don't want to waste time looking at small print online.
Exactly. So, and we're going to see more and more of this, and now we also have the fracking issue, which is a major issue now. We have it down over here in Ireland. It's been happening down south. And I know Enoch Crane has been over there in the UK dealing with fracking issues as well. And again, I don't know, I mean, what's your take on that? Have you looked into that at all?
Well, a bit. I mean, it's complicated. You see, I think that some fracking can definitely be dangerous. That's true and should be stopped. But there's probably some fracking which is perfectly safe. I mean, it's just like coal mining, you see. Some coal mining causes subsidence, and open cast mining is very ugly, but, maybe passable in places. Other coal mining can be perfectly safe. So, there has to be proper regulation of it, but I'm not against fracking in principle. I mean, so far as the chemicals are used as well, of course, there has to be careful understanding of what there is. But I mean, I'm not against it 100%. It has to be properly controlled. There are other ways of getting energy out of the ground, such as coal, anyway. And England is an island with masses of coal underneath it, which could be better used.
Well, I know a lot of people. I've seen videos in America where the gases are gone in the water, and when they turn on the tap, they could actually set it on fire.
Well, yeah, that's true. If the fracking is too close to the surface, and that sort of stuff should not be allowed. But I mean, it's the same as saying, well, okay, coal mines near the surface have caused subsidence. That is true, but they didn't end coal mining. So, I mean, there's scare stories and there's real stories. I mean, and I think there's obviously some problems, and they have to be addressed. And I don't think everyone should think, oh yeah, fracking is going to solve all our problems, because it's going to bring certain problems.
Well, the thing is that
the mathematics of it seem to show there is huge amounts of potential natural gas and energy available from this. But it's also the case, I've read, that the people behind it, of course, are exaggerating this as well for their own purposes. So you've got to somehow get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, well, I suppose the tester is that the people who are actually organising the fracking, if they actually have the fracking beside their house and they accept it, then, but will that happen? No. Chances are.
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you see, there's plenty of people in the north of England and Scotland who've got coal mines quite near them, and they've done that, you know.
Yeah, but coal mines, you know, you're not having your...
the way it's underneath, yeah.
Yeah, but you're not having your water going on fire when you light it. That, you know, coal mining isn't going to do that.
If that happens, then it has to be stopped. But you see, if fracking is deep enough, then of course that doesn't happen. You see. So you have to look into it. As I said, there's dangerous fracking and there's probably some safe fracking.
Yeah.
That has to be found and understood and used only.
I think we'd have to. That's a subject that we've asked people to come on who actually are not so much experts, but have been involved in fracking. Yeah. And for some reason, it's very hard to get somebody on to talk about fracking. But we're here to talk about.
You know, I mean, they ought to be prepared to defend their case if they have one. You know, that's what I would say to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, we're not going out to attack them. We just want to get the information and let our listeners decide for themselves based on the information put out there. And
you're right. That's what open your mind radio is about. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, if two people from both sides of the camp want to come on and talk about it and then debate their issues, then fine. We're more than happy to do that. But obviously, what we want to talk about is the climate change and the global changes going on. What we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen massive changes globally on the planet. We've seen, as I said when we were talking before we went live, Yellowstone is getting very active. They reported a whole list of 5.9 earthquakes on Yellowstone on the US Geological Survey. And obviously with these sinkholes that are happening and the flooding, can you kind of give us an idea what you think is going on with all this globally?
Right. There's two issues. One is a question of weather and climate. The other is a question of geophysics, moving of rocks, earthquakes, and so forth. Now, we are in a period where there appears to be more more earthquakes and so forth. And this does happen periodically. Now, it appears to be connected with solar activity. Namely, during periods of low solar activity, they tend to be more volcanic activity and more large earthquakes. Not necessarily more earthquakes, but less smaller ones and more larger ones. And we understand that this is statistically true. Now, we are entering a period of general low solar activity, which surprisingly means more bigger earthquakes. And you might wonder, well, how does that happen? But I'll come to that in a second. But the point is that these things go together. Right, now when we are predicting generally we're in a period of low solar activity, and this is going to carry on for the next 20 years, and this is called a mini ice age, and it involves very big changes in the jet stream. So it involves weather extremes, and it involves on average more earthquakes and volcanoes. Now, how that works is sort of understood in terms of, if you think of imagine a bag of sugar, right? And you tip the bag of sugar out, just carefully tip it over, and the sugar just comes out in big lumps. But if you tap the sugar bag, go tap it, then it will come out in little bits and dribble, and you won't get a big hit. Now, the Earth is tectonic plates, which are all trying to move all the time. And if they get lots of little hits, impacts from the solar wind and the magnetic effects of the Earth's magnetic field, which is influenced by the sun's magnetic field. If you have little hits happening on the Earth's magnetic field all the time, then the plates move and generally will just have a lot of little earthquakes. But if there's less hits from outside, then the plates get stuck for longer, and when they move, they go bump, and you get bigger quakes and more activity. And that is why we think statistically, when there's been periods of low solar activity, you've got more earthquakes and volcanoes. Now, of course, some people say, yes, and the earthquakes and volcanoes made it colder. Well, actually, we think both is happening. There's low solar activity, which makes the world colder because of the way it affects the jet stream, and it also encourages more volcanoes, and some of those will eject particles high enough in the atmosphere into the stratosphere, like the one that's just happened a few days ago, that is going to cause an amount of global cooling.
Okay, and what about, I mean, John Moore, again, John was on our show there last year, and he speaks to a guy called Stan Deo, and he has a website called standeo.com, who deals with kind of weather and conditions and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And he reported that the jet stream had stopped in 2010, and this is why we're getting the weather conditions we're getting as well. That is a.
Ever done what in 2010?
It stopped.
Oh, well, it got stuck. Yes. Now, yeah, that what happened in fact, if you go on our website and go to our presentations, and there's a video on our website, which is also on my Twitter account, which is at Piers_Corbyn. There we describe, and in a video of a presentation I gave, what happened in 2010. The jet stream had basically got stuck in a sort of more or less static position, and we knew that it was only going to be shifted by a big solar event, and that happened in August, around August the 15th, 2010. And the result of that was big thunderstorms in St. Petersburg. The whole jet stream shifted, and the Russian heat wave ended, and also the deluges leading to floods in Pakistan suddenly reduced. But the important thing to understand is the jet stream is essentially driven, its changes driven by solar activity, and it's predictable in a lot of ways. Now, during these mini ice age times, which the Earth has already entered, the beginning of one, the jet stream gets longer, is on average further south, and it behaves in a much wilder fashion than in other times. So we could call it a wild jet stream age, if you like, and we are in that now. And you can see, just looking on the jet stream estimated maps, that it makes huge meanders and changes. And that causes big extremes, both extreme cold, like in America for basically the whole of the winter and spring was very cold in basically the eastern half and northern parts of the US of A. Phenomenally cold, and Lake Michigan has still got ice on it, large amounts of ice in Lake Michigan, and it's like we're moving into something different. Well, we are moving into something different. We're in a beginnings of a mini ice age, and this is going to carry on for the next 25 years.
25 years?
25 years.
All right, so so we're actually in it now at the moment, are we?
We're in the start of it, yes. We've seen what our predictions are, or were, and still are, that you get more weather extremes, on average more cold, longer winters, later springs. Sometimes there'll be extreme heat, but those bits of extreme heat, because that's due to the long jet stream and it going in different places. Extreme heat will generally be shorter than the extreme cold, but you will get both. And during the last mini ice age, there were very interesting situations, and Hubert Lamb, a astounding meteorologist, who died some decade or so ago, but he pointed out that during the last mini ice age, which was called the Dalton minimum, the early 1800s, 1795 to 1820 or so, the jet stream was so varied that in fact there were periods of melting ice in the Arctic associated with it. And that had also happened during the previous one, the Maunder minimum. So these big wild extremes of the jet stream are also associated with wild ocean currents. And those are the things which are causing temporary melting and then refreezing or whatever of Arctic ice. And the Admiralty reported this to the, or rather the Royal Society reported this to the Admiralty. Or they were working together, of course, because it was important to know about the ice melting. So these bits of melting that have happened in the Arctic are actually no surprise at all, and they're temporary phenomena and actually associated with the wild jet stream and mini ice age we're in. They're nothing whatsoever to do with carbon dioxide or man-made climate change, the theory of which is delusional nonsense.
Well, it's just funny that you say mini ice age, and I suppose a lot of people who don't understand the weather have this impression that it's going to be like an ice age. But if you're saying that we're starting into it and it's only going to last 25 years, you know,
Right.
I can kind of live with that. I mean, if it's a case that we're going to get a winter and it's going to be a bit icy and a little bit snowy, I can live with that. But when you're talking what happened in America where they were doing like -30, -40, I mean, that was incredible weather to kind of survive through.
It was incredible, but that is mini ice age. But, you know, there might be a winter in America where it'll be not so cold as that, might be, and it will be instead extremely cold here. I mean, that's the type of thing that happens when the jet stream waves around, or in this case, it was waved so much they described it as the polar vortex tilted, so that what was, you know, basically the North Pole was tilted more towards, you know, parts of America.
How cold has it ever been in the UK and Ireland? What's the coldest on record for Ireland and the UK?
About -25, something like that in places.
And it was much colder in the States.
Oh yes. In the States and in Russia, you can get temperatures of I think -60 is probably the record, but you know, -40 is a type of thing which can happen in these circumstances, and that's very dangerous. You know, you walk around in that without gloves on, and you're going to die. You're going to get frostbite.
Yeah, definitely. If it's that cold, I just want to remind our listeners that if you have any questions, I'm just compiling a few questions now at the moment.
I think it's important to distinguish between a full ice age and a mini ice age. The full ice age means the ice cap expands, and last time we had one in the Northern Hemisphere, the ice cap covered Scotland, went to the Midlands, and would have covered Northern Ireland and probably not Southern Ireland. And you know, it would be like us living in Greenland. It would be equivalent to that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just let our listeners know that.
Ice age, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about a mini ice age, which is these wild extremes. However, there will be a full ice age. When it's going to happen, we don't know. But I mean, it may be after this mini ice age, we'll start heading towards that. Yeah. But they take 1,000 or 2 years to establish anyway.
We'll have to see what happens. If our listeners have any questions, obviously, put them on the chat room there, and we'll ask them. Pop them over to Piers, and we'll have a question section. Piers, now, the other thing that's kind of out there on the internet, and some people might say, oh, here we go again, conspiracy theorists, blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot of kind of evidence to say that there's something there and something happened. Now, the fact that you said, you know, what's going on with the planet are solar changes, causes from solar changes to planet change. Now, there's a lot of people, a lot of scientists, I don't know whether it's disinformation, but there seems to be a lot of evidence out there. They're talking about this Planet X and Erebus, and they're saying that this is making solar changes, which is causing the changes on our planet, because it's now doing a kind of perihelion around the sun and now coming towards us. And within the next 9 months or so, we're going to see an increase in certain things happening globally.
Right. Well, I don't know if that theory is true or not. But we are able to predict certain things, not using any Planet X idea. But of course, that doesn't mean that it's not there. So you know, I wouldn't rule out those things. But you see, the trouble is that there's a lot of ideas around, and just because there's a mad idea, it doesn't mean it's right. I mean, most mad ideas are wrong, but they should all be entertained. I think really there's a couple of things to get clear. One is why the CO2 theory is false, and two, what really is changing things so far as we know. So, if you don't mind, I go back to the CO2 theory. Right?
Okay, yeah.
The reason why it's wrong is that it doesn't work, but there's no evidence for. There's two reasons why we can say it's nonsense. One is there's no actual evidence for carbon dioxide leading and causing changes in world temperatures. The data in the past shows that is not the case. They basically move independently, and carbon dioxide has been high or low when temperature has been low or high, and vice versa. What we do know is that after real big ice ages, first of all, temperatures rise, and then carbon dioxide rises. So, if anything's going on, temperatures are driving carbon dioxide, not the other way around. Right? That's a fact, as observed data. The second thing is that if this theory of CO2 by man controlling climate is correct, then you have to say, well, okay, suppose CO2 is controlling climate. Now, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is a certain amount, and man's contribution to the flow of atmosphere in and out of the biosphere all the time, because it's coming out of the ground and going into the ground, out of the sea and into the sea, out of plants and into plants and so on. Man's contribution is only 4% of that. So 96% of the flux of CO2 is nature. Now, if man is going to control it, then that means there has to be a conspiracy of nature for the whole of nature to just keep quiet and keep exactly the same amount of CO2 coming in and out, while man increases his bit, and that causes climate change. Well, that is insanity. It is total insanity. Because you see, ants alone, termites, produce 10 times more CO2 and greenhouse effect so-called than man. So, you know, suppose the ants were to start changing, then of course they'd be controlling climate, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
And there's a conspiracy between all living things and all dead things to hold together and let man rule the roost. Now this is clinically insane. It's lunacy. But this is what they believe. I mean, it's mad. So you can delete that whole theory anyway, even if there's evidence of any truth in the idea. Man wouldn't rule anyway. The ants would rule, or volcanoes would rule, or cows farting would rule, or rice paddies would rule. I mean, it's ridiculous. Okay, so we can dismiss the theory as arrant nonsense and a political game. But what really is causing changes in climate? I mean, you could say, well, they just happen by random. Well, okay, fair enough. But there is signal in them. There's variability in them. And they go along with variations in the sun. When there's low solar activity, climate is generally colder. And when there's high solar activity, that means more partly from the sun, generally warmer. Now, you can go into lots of things about why the sun is changing, and that's where this planet X or whatever happens. And we've got our own ideas. But certainly, there are lots of cycles involved. And the reason why we're able to make predictions is we've got a mathematical formulation of these cycles and subcycles and modulations of cycles involving the moon. So we have a solar and lunar theory. And if you want to know what's going to happen this summer, for example, next Christmas, we say, okay, let's just take next Christmas. We look at the winters and we see, well, okay, we've got our mathematical descriptions of Sun-Earth magnetic connections happening. What are they going to be like around Christmas? And when were they last like that in the past? Could have been easily hundreds of years ago. And then we look at the weather in the past to say, okay, if the forcing factors were then the same as they're going to be at Christmas, then we'd use the weather in the past to forecast the weather in the future. And that is how we do that, how we do it. And that's how we predicted the coldest in 100 years December in 2010 by looking at things in the past where it was very cold. Now, it's not clockwork. You can't get it exact, and you've got to modify things because of what is going on. But we can certainly predict when there's going to be big impacts of particle influence from the sun, when they're going to happen, and what they're likely to cause. And we're in one now, actually, an R5 period. It's just ending today, actually. From the 29th to today, we had a big R5 because they go 1 to 5. Top level, and we said that will cause certain weather extremes, more tornadoes and heavy rain in places, which it has done. And also, specifically, we do warn that on these, certainly R5 occasions, there's more likely to be bigger earthquakes and volcanoes. And of course, that big volcano that just erupted did happen in our R5 period. Now, others do happen, but statistically, it seems to be the case that there's some truth in what we say, especially for the most extreme events.
Okay, are you monitoring, or have you been looking at the Yellowstone USGS, what they're reporting over there?
Yes, a bit. We're not experts in that. We do more on the weather, but it has been getting more active around there systematically, that is true. And there have been signs of animals responding, and it is definitely the case. Animals do respond to earthquakes before they happen, and that is to do with the magnetic field of the Earth changing, probably geomagnetic activity changing. It could be radon gas emitted, which comes out of granite rocks which have been damaged underneath, and this happens in Cornwall, for example. It could be the animals that are detecting that, but all creatures have magnetic detectors in them, and birds, of course, use the magnetic detectors for their guidance. Humans have got them in their nose as well, but they're generally things that people don't use these days. But probably are there. And if man was more in tune with nature, he probably would feel a bit scared if he was, walking around Yellowstone Park in a well, I don't know what he'd wear a bear skin or wear a cotton jacket. I don't know, but whatever.
He'd wear something. Yeah, well, it's worthwhile, tuning in. I'm just watching the statistics and people reporting on the seismographs and what's going on over there because
it's very interesting.
It is because if people, our listeners, remember when Iceland, the volcano in Iceland went off, we had all this dust, volcanic dust, and all the planes were grounded for a period of time, and they're saying that Yellowstone is so big that if that goes off, multiply that by 10,000 times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, all the planes would have to be grounded. Well, of course, if I think about were the planes grounded for political reasons or real reasons, because I don't know, because I've heard some pilots say, well, hang on, we could fly in this, but not all planes could fly in it. So, why don't they design planes that could fly in it? There's another issue. However, it's absolutely clear that a big volcano and a lot of dust, the planes can't fly, the engines get damaged. So if Yellowstone blew, there'd be a lot of health problems on the ground anyway from all the sulphurous fumes. But it's probable that a more likely event, rather than Yellowstone blowing, is the fault line that goes through America, goes through California.
Is that the Miranda fault line? Is it?
Yeah, fault. Yeah.
Yeah, and if that goes down, well, again, they are saying...
And you have property values in LA go right down, I would say.
Oh, yeah, just about, yeah, just a little bit, yeah.
Goes down.
I wouldn't
because it'd be very serious, but in terms of a place to build a city, it's a stupid place. But, a bit like, there's a lot of places that are built on stupid places, floodplains and so forth.
Well, look at Fukushima, for example. That was built on the fault line.
Indeed.
So they're a typical example. I think it's called Miranda. I'm sure somebody on the internet, on our chat room, will tell us if that's right. There's a part over there in America which they're watching at the moment. We'll go over to the questions anyway, Piers. Sure. We have Gillian from PIR, and Gillian wants to know, can I ask Piers...
Is it Julian or Gillian?
Gillian. And Gillian wants to know, why do you think it's right to fracture the Earth?
Well, I'm not saying it's right. Oh, but you mean in general, like mining or whatever, is it right or wrong? Well...
like fracking, why do you think it's right to fracture the Earth?
Fracking. Well, if you can obtain some useful stuff from it without causing undue damage or danger, then it's okay, equivalent to coal mining. But, in general, it would be better to perhaps avoid having to do such things. But we do need to, I would say, mine coal or oil or whatever, or gas, in order to produce energy.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. And Steve...
So, I want to be clear, we've got to have safety issues have to be, the tops.
Yeah, well, of course, but I personally feel we don't need to do it because...
Well, maybe we don't need to, but that's another issue as to whether... You see, I think you're right, we don't need to because there's enough coal.
Yeah.
But presumably a lot of people who don't like fracking wouldn't like coal either. But I'm not sure about that. Some of them might think coal is okay and fracking's not. Which is fair enough. Okay, but if you think that, then we get on with the coal mines.
But it's not even that, Piers. Using fossil fuels... we had Nikola Tesla. He's proved free energy, and they have over Unity devices now producing energy. And so we have this technology out there. The reason why they don't want to release it, for obvious reasons, is because they lose money.
Sure. No, I agree. So far as there are this free energy, if it's true, then it ought to be developed. Now, I agree with that completely, and my understanding of it is there are certainly some things going on which definitely do work. It doesn't mean they're cheap automatically, but if they're developed, they could be extremely cheap. There are other things which could be developed, just like using solar radiation more directly with better photovoltaic cells. Currently, that's expensive. Or tidal power again. Currently, that is expensive. So I'm basically just saying, well, you should use the cheapest available, subject to conditions, and obviously do research into things. But wind farms are complete madness. They're expensive and will never be an exciting.
Well, if you, I suppose the reason why, if you go back to
a very small scale, you can have a little one in your garden, but you're not gonna run railway trains with wind farms.
Well, to be honest with you, there's a neighbour not too far away from me, about a kilometre away, and they had a little mini wind farm, well, not wind farm, but wind turbine in the back garden, and I only seen it working once, and ever since then it's been lying on the ground and never been used.
Well, of course, they're expensive. Somebody's making money out of selling you a wind turbine, and they think you think you're saving the planet. Well, actually, you're giving some guy in China a job for a few weeks. So instead of working on the land, he's busy exporting prayer wheels to Britain and Ireland for them to be lying on the ground or sitting idle.
Yeah, you see, the whole thing with if you go back at the history of Nikola Tesla, and he wanted to give free energy, and when JP Morgan knew they couldn't meter it, he pulled the plug on them. And that's what, it's always down to money, isn't it? It's always down to money. And these hidden technologies and free energy devices they have, the patents have been all buried for national security reasons,
There's a whole lot of stuff out there. See, I'm a physicist. There's lots of stuff in physics, in electrical physics, in electromagnetism, which is not understood. And I'm part of the Electric Universe project, where we think that the electrical forces in the universe are actually much more important than have hitherto been assumed. And a lot of the assumptions that, it's all just gravity and this and that happening is not the case. There's a lot of electrical interactions which are of fundamental importance. And there are many things about electricity we do not understand, which could probably be turned into sources of energy, which is basically what the Nikola Tesla ideas are about.
Exactly, and the whole idea that physics is saying...
And he was, cheated, understated,
yeah.
and so forth.
Yeah, the law of physics saying that you can't get more out than what you put in. That's been disproved so many times now with certain devices that are out there, and proving it and putting multimeters on them and showing the energy. And this is what we need to get out there. And I was also told by a chap who's very well up on this stuff.
Which are not like nuclear cold fusion, is it happening or not? Now, my information is that it can work. It doesn't mean it's cheap at this point in time, but nevertheless, it can work.
It can work, yeah. Well, again, you probably heard about the Iranian scientist Kirsch.
Yes.
He's releasing a lot of the information and they're trying to shut him up. And you can download his information if you go to, I think it's the Camelot portal, Kerry Cassidy's site, and you can actually download his DVD for free. And it's about 3 or 4 gig, and he's basically giving it out to everybody for free. So it's out there, so they can't kind of shut him up. That's the idea. Right, I have another question from my co-host Steve, who's still minding the baby.
Excellent.
And he says, has Piers seen... Sorry?
How's the baby?
He's doing well. He's doing the babysitting. He's doing well.
Baby, anyway.
He says, has Piers seen the movie Snowpiercer, and does he think geoengineering could amplify the mini ice age into a full-blown ice age?
Well, yeah, geoengineering. There is geoengineering going on, and it's run by mad people that believe governments and the Met Office and so forth, who have admitted they're involved in spreading dust in the atmosphere in order to suppress sunlight and so on. And there's other aspects of geoengineering, like the HARP project, which is, putting radiation in the ionosphere and maybe upsetting the ionosphere. Now, are these things having decisive impacts yet? I don't think they are. Would governments in the world like to be able to make weather changes and cause storms in other countries? The answer is yes, of course they would. And they are probably working on this as we speak. But are they in a position to do it yet? I don't think so. You see, the reason why I say that is because we make our forecasts. We predict extreme storms. For example, we predicted that 23 weeks ahead, we predicted there would be a big, severe storm hitting southern England and Ireland, but certainly southern England, late October, towards the end of October last year. We predicted that 23 weeks ahead, and it happened, right? Now, there are people who say, oh yeah, well, it was all driven by HARP or something going on. Well, okay, but if that's true, then the HARP have to be reading our forecasts and deciding to, Oh, Piers says there's going to be a storm. Let's give him a storm. Well, I don't think they're doing that somehow. So I don't think that man, even the mad ones, have reached the situation where they can actually control the weather in a large scale effectively. What I could say is, though, when the weather's in a critical state, which it always is in a critical state somewhere, but when it's in a critical state, like there's a thunderstorm about to happen, or a cloud wanting to drop rain, then you can make it drop the rain. That's absolutely true. You can throw solid carbon dioxide into it to make nucleation centres, or silver iodide, and you can nucleate the cloud formation, if you like, and make it deluge. And in China they do that, and in Britain they could do that, and probably did do that just before the Lynmouth disaster.
Oh, I know, in Ireland they're doing that, trust me. We get more bloody rain over here than I don't know what.
Well, that's true, but see, if it happens there, then it doesn't happen somewhere else. I mean, you can't make it from nothing. You've got to have the cloud there to start with. Yeah.
Well, this is what HARP does. HARP doesn't create. It doesn't. Apparently, it doesn't create the weather. What it does, it modifies what's there.
You can steer the weather.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's funny. That's the next question, because Agent want to know: can you ask Piers about HARP and whether it's used to create bad weather?
Well, I think they'd like to do that. But whether they're doing it or not, I don't know. You need some people who are more experts on it. But again, see, from electric universe understanding, we do think a lot of these things are possible. Because we know when we have big effects on the sun, and that film about the jet stream in 2010 and what happened then, and this happens on a regular basis anyway, is that you have something in the sun, the solar wind changes, the ionosphere changes, and then the jet stream changes. So they're all linked together. So if you can change the ionosphere from below instead, then of course you can change the jet stream as well.
Well, the thing is about the whole idea of geoengineering. I mean, you can go online to companies offering geoengineering, and they've been doing this since the 60s. So there must be a way that they're doing it, because obviously the next question here from one of our listeners, Nameless, says, can you ask your guest what he thinks about chemtrails?
Yeah, well, I think there are definitely chemtrails being put there, and they're put there by people who think they're saving the planet or something, but they're actually just mad people. Are they having a cooling effect? Well, they would do, yes, they would do, if you have enough of them. But is it having a big impact at this point in time? I don't think so, no, because you need something like that big volcano going up. Now, you look at that volcano that's happening now, you think, well, that's a ginormous amount of dust going into the atmosphere, and Krakatoa was that. Now, for mankind to produce that much dust is just not possible, right? It's not possible.
But they're not producing dust with the chemtrails, Piers. Basically, we had Michael Murphy on the show, and he's done a documentary called "What in the World Are They Spraying?" And he's saying that the chemtrails are actually having a detrimental effect because they're spraying aluminium, barium, and strontium.
Yeah. I agree with that. No, they are detrimental, yeah. But are they sufficient to make, a significant impact on world temperatures? I don't think so. Could they be if they put masses of it up there? Well, maybe, but a better way would be if they wanted to do that, to somehow trigger a volcano to go off, and there you are, and you have it.
Yeah, well, see, the thing is with the chemtrails, I mean, maybe it's part of geoengineering, but it's also part, a lot of people talk about the eugenics program, which, whether you believe it or not, it's another thing. But if the chemicals coming down from the chemtrails are strontium, barium, aluminium, that's going to be landing on the ground. And as Michael Murphy said in his documentary, when the scientists analysed the pH of the actual soil, it was changing it, fundamentally changing it. And he was over in Hawaii, and the bark was coming off trees, and it was having definitely a really bad effect on the environment,
Yeah. No, I'd agree. This stuff is poisonous, monstrous, and it should be stopped. It's. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to kill people? I don't know. But I do know that the people that are obsessed with climate change, if you scratch them, and if you happen to be in a meeting where they've forgotten you're present, they do start talking about the need to reduce world population. And I'm dead serious on that. They think there's about twice as many, if not more than twice as many people in the world as there should be.
Right.
Now, my view is that is complete nonsense. Every person is born with a pair of hands. Every stomach is born with a pair of hands, and they can work and produce food. And as it is, there could be a lot more efficient farming. There could be a lot more efficient use of the sea, and probably hundreds of times more people could be supported on the planet than at present if it was organised better.
Yeah.
But I don't think the numbers of people now are a problem. I mean, any more than the number of termites around is a problem.
Well, I always say when people turn around like Al Gore or like Bill Gates and says there's too many people on the earth, we need to reduce it. I'm always up for people leading by example.
Oh yes, I would like him to lead by example.
But they never do they? They always talk about everybody else should be leaving the planet, but oh no, we can't leave the planet,
It's a bit like the Michael Moore. He went and interviewed lots of congressmen and said, "Oh, is your son in the army defending the country?" And funnily enough, they weren't.
That's right. There was 42 interviewed, and only one of them had a son in the army, and the other 41 didn't have any children in the army. I mean, that kind of tells you something, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Right, we have another question here from Vin from People's Internet Radio. Vin wants to know, vertical axis wind turbines are a different kettle of fish. Does your guest have an opinion on them?
Right. Well, I don't know. You mean they might be less damaging for birds? I'm not sure about that. Well, they could be. But no, I think all wind turbines are mad. They still wouldn't go round when there's no wind anyway.
Okay, well, yeah.
Question, why didn't they make them that way round? And I don't know. It might be because they want to impress you by looking at having something going around and round to impress you, to show you the power of government and big business and so forth. A bit like the Great Wall of China. You ask yourself, well, did the Great Wall of China actually defend people? Or was it there for political purposes to show the people in China that the emperor was in charge, and a man who could move stones to this extent with, well, not himself,
yeah,
would be able to control you, and you better just obey everything. And I think there's a political impact of that nature in wind farms.
Yeah. Well, again, with the whole idea of the wind turbines, I mean, you're going to have this, if they are turning, they'll just turn when they need to turn. So you're going to have this whining noise 24/7 for people who are living near them. They destroy the environment. They reduce your house price because people don't want to live near them, and probably a host of other health issues which we haven't even considered.
Correct. Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, this is why probably over here in Ireland, I mean, as I say, there's been groups being put together, have come together to stop the wind farms being put in. There's been a hold on it now at the moment, but I can probably guarantee they're still going to go off and start its own property. And my belief is that whoever decides to bring in the wind farms or bring in something like, fracking and stuff, well, they should have it near their property. Like, if it's a minister, and they don't mind it, well, stick it beside their property and see if they like it first.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that, absolutely.
I'm always a big believer in lead by example. Definitely, that's a given. But so what else that would we cover regarding, because you're talking about the solar effects on the planet with the weather conditions. Now, I know in kind of the amateur radio circles that every 11 years or so, there's a high, and the propagation for radio communication gets picked up. There's a lift on the ionosphere, and where you couldn't actually talk to certain people in different countries, you end up being able to do it. It happened in the 80s, where I know over here in Ireland and maybe in the UK that basically you could actually talk to people on a small CB radio over to the States because the propagation was so good, because the ionosphere, because there was a lift on, because of this 11-year cycle. Now, they're saying that we're due this 11-year cycle again, if not, we're probably in it at the moment. But they're also saying that we're due a mass coronal ejection from the sun, which in 2012 they said there was a massive one, and it just missed the planet. And if it happens again and we get hit, it's going to go back to like the Carrington effect in 1859.
Yeah.
So, do you think that's a possibility?
Well, there's always coronal mass ejections. They're happening all the time. There's big ones and small ones, and the biggest ones, generally speaking, happen at periods of solar maximum. But in these mini ice age type of conditions of general low solar activity, you can also get some big ones in the periods of general quiet as well. So you can't rule them out at any time. When they do happen, of course, there's an issue as to whether they're going to hit Earth or not. Can we say when the next Carrington-type event, as it's called, which was a ginormous coronal mass ejection, do we know when that's going to happen? No, we don't. People who are saying there's one due, well, I don't think they've got any evidence for saying there's one due more now than any other time. So I can't answer to say there is one, but I think the trouble is that the media always report anything that happens as if it is the most extreme thing since sliced bread, when it probably is not.
Mm. And if there was a mass, if we did have a Carrington effect, what do you think the symptoms would be of that hitting the planet?
But it would damage electrical transmission systems and cause blowouts in a lot of transformers and stuff like that. So there'd be massive electricity outages all around the world, basically.
Well, you know what I said earlier at the start of the show, John Moore said on his show that from his contacts, John Moore is an ex-homicide detective and military man and everything else, and he was talking about he's been told by an insider that the Department of Defense in the US are frantically getting ready for an EMP to hit the States. Now, whether they blame it on a coronal mass ejection, I don't know. That's what they're saying. So it'll probably have the same effect.
Is it made by some other government or something like that?
Yeah, well, you know, they could have a satellite up there that we don't know of that could cause this, you know, have this effect, because they have their own reasons why they want to do that. Now, the other thing that we haven't really talked about, and I'd like to get your take on it, is the actual Chandler effect, the wobble that's going on at the moment, apparently.
Chandler wobble, yeah.
Yeah.
The Chandler wobble is, what is it, 6.2 years, isn't it? But it's a tiny thing. It's not, doesn't do much at all. It's a tiny little wobble of the Earth's, it's a wobble of the Earth's spin axis.
Right, but, I mean...
Periodicity of about six years, as far as I remember. And my understanding of it, I did some work on it years ago, actually. It's some type of tidal type of thing, complicated tidal thing. Yeah,
because, you know, we had 3 ships. We had the Concordia, the one in Italy that ran aground, and we had 2 other ships, and they're actually saying, I was watching a documentary on YouTube there, and they're actually saying because of this wobble and because of the air changes and the oceans changing, that was the cause of the ship.
No. The captain wasn't paying attention, or he was drunk, or being stupid, or he was driving. Well, actually, that one of those ships, I don't know if it was that one, they'd built the sides on it higher, so it wasn't able to turn sharp corners as well as it used to. But he still turned sharp corners with it when it was going too fast, and it basically fell over.
Right, okay. And
to do with the Chandler wobble. No, the Chandler wobble is like comparing a gnat with an elephant to say the Chandler wobble is anything to do with this.
Right, okay. And what about so it wouldn't be got to do with land changes or anything got, you know, because you said earlier on about some ocean changes.
Some rocks there that had popped up for some reason. Yeah, of course, but I don't think that was the case either. He was navigating a ship where he shouldn't have been.
Yeah. Because and the same with that the Malaysian flight MH370. There's some kind of, you know, suspicions that there was something going on from a either global or solar, you know, something happening there that affected the navigation or affected the plane. Again, there's so many theories as to what happened to MH370. Nobody knows for sure. But they're saying there is some kind of anomaly, a weather anomaly, or there's something in that area, and it's happened to other planes before. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
Well, you mean like the Bermuda Triangle and stuff like that?
Well, yeah, something like, I suppose something like that, but I don't want to go down the Bermuda Triangle route, but yeah, something that there's some kind of anomaly in that area that other planes have been affected by it as well.
Well, right, but you still should be able to find the plane. And is there any sign of the plane? I mean, I haven't heard anything recently.
No, they haven't found anything.
I heard there was meant to be something in that area where something had been seen, but then I never saw a follow-up, so maybe it was just a false alarm. But it is a bit strange it's disappeared completely. I mean, when something like that happens, you think there's some human involvement and the plane was somehow hijacked, but on the other hand, if that was true, then you would probably hear about that as well. So I'm as puzzled as anybody on this.
Yeah. Okay. And what in the next? I mean, do you have any kind of predictions in the next 10 years where you see things going at the moment with with what's going on?
Well, yeah, the general prognosis for the weather on the Earth in the next 10 years is general cooling in both hemispheres, longer winters, shorter summers, later springs, interspersed with some hot spells, even very hot spells, which are generally shorter. More extreme events, not necessarily more. It doesn't mean more tornadoes, but it means more very extreme tornadoes and more very extreme thunderstorms. More hail, damaging hail events. And during the last mini ice ages, there were lots more hail damage of crops and so on. And this will become a more significant problem for agriculture. So there will be problems for agriculture involving hail damage, involving shorter growing seasons, and so forth. And I've been to speak at big conferences where they talked about exactly this problem. And that is where we have to be looking, not the other direction, where the warmish claim it's going to get warmer, and which presumably mean less agricultural problems. Anyway, so that is the essential point, and there will be more storm systems which would cause trouble hitting land in America, for example, because the tropical storm Sandy hitting America was caused by a mixture of big waves in the jet stream bringing cold air south, and that getting mixed up with something coming north, and then that caused that land hit. So statistically, there'll be more of those sort of storms. During the end of the last mini ice age and the start, and during it, there were more very big storms. The Great Tempest of 1703 happened around the end of the Maunder minimum. And that was the biggest storm for the last 300 years. So, generally speaking, bad weather news. And the answer is we have to prepare for these things, not look in the wrong direction. Okay,
so, I mean, if you're at home and you're watching the news and the weather forecasts come on, I mean, how accurate are these people predicting weather, what's going on?
They're quite good a couple of days ahead, but we know they're going to run into increasing problems even for that distance ahead, because with the jet stream being more wavy, it moves. When it moves, it has a more dramatic effect, and there's a bigger lapse rate in the atmosphere generally. That means it gets colder quicker as you go up. That upsets their calculations, and it means that things develop more quickly into more extremes than they expected in their models. So their models currently can't cope with this, which is why people have noticed that last few weeks actually the weather forecasts have been completely all over the place.
Well, to be honest with you, when I see a weather forecast, and this just is my own personal opinion, I actually don't listen to them, because guaranteed they're going to be wrong.
Well, yeah, that is pretty true. Well, given they give out about 5 forecasts for any event, and one of them is going to be right, but you see,
yeah.
At Weather Action, we don't do that. We basically have just one forecast some weeks or months ahead, like I told you about that big storm, and we don't change it. When you get nearer the time, we might think, oh, well, it's going to be wrong. And we say, all right, it's going to be wrong. And we might say that, or we just don't say anything. And when it is wrong, though, it's also the case that you can use our red spikes, we call them, these R5 periods and R4 periods. If there's one of those on, anything that's wind or rain predicted by standard meteorology will turn out to be more severe, quite irrespective of the weather pattern which is coming, whether we got that right or wrong. So like now in an R5, if they were talking about rain, then you could change that to heavy rain.
Right, okay. Because as I say, I look at I look at the weather forecast if I do see it, but I kind of never bother with it, because you're guaranteed.
It's entertainment mostly.
It's entertainment. I mean, they actually have a snippet of over here in our radio station, which is the national radio station RTA, or we call it Rothschild's Trivial Entertainment because it's all full of lies. You know, it's the media, the mainstream media, and they're full of it. You know, and but actually the weather forecast slipped up. I don't know whether she slipped up or made a genuine mistake, but she actually referred to chemtrails rather than contrails.
Really?
Yeah, she did. She actually said it, and it's on YouTube. And somebody recorded it and put it up on YouTube, and she said chemtrails. And we were surprised at that because, you know, we see it all the time, and I'm sure our listeners all over the place see all the spraying going on with the chemtrails. And it's just, that was the kind of, you know, the first acknowledgement. But then again, on German TV, again on YouTube, there's another video of German meteorologists giving out in the mainstream media about the chemtrails, and they're saying, why is the German military spraying chemtrails in the air? Now, it's obviously subtitled, but this is apparently what they're saying. So it's beginning to come out in the public. More and more people are beginning to ask questions. I mean, it's so obvious the difference between a chemtrail and a contrail and the effect they're having, but I would recommend, if you have time, to go over and watch the documentary What in the World Are They Spraying, because it is actually, there is scientists on it, and they're talking about the chemicals that are being sprayed. Now, whether it's because of global warming, whether it's because of depopulation, and a number of other reasons, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, they shouldn't really be doing it whatsoever, but our governments are allowing planes to fly over and do it. And in the UK, I'm sure it's the same thing. It's very rare to see a blue sky these days. Mm-hmm. That's generally, so that's why I think it has to completely stop there. It definitely has to stop. But the HARP, one of the things as well he said about HARP and the weather modification, apparently that's supposed to be closing down. I know somebody on the chat room posted up there and saying about it being closed down, and I did get a message from Dr. Carol Roslin over in America. She sent me a link on our Skype saying about them closing HARP down. Now, I don't know why they would close it down if they've been using it this long, unless they found another way to do it, which is going to be kind of less cost effective than HARP. I don't know. But we have seen some strange weather anomalies globally around the planet, and it's very hard, I suppose. I don't know, when you analyse something, did you see the Norwegian spiral? Have you seen that video?
No, I haven't seen that one. No, I've seen quite a few of these, but I don't recall that one.
Okay.
Okay, carry on. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, if you go on YouTube and you type in Norwegian spiral, it'd be great to get your take on what you think it is. Okay.
Yeah, I think, are they closing HARP down? Well, I don't know, but I mean, all these things are technology, so they might be making a bigger one. And I would suspect they would be making a bigger one because it's the military stuff, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, one shouldn't imagine they're just there, you know, doing good things. They're there, the military are there doing not good things.
Yeah, I'm just reading, I have a question here. One of the questions is from Steve, my co-host. What is Piers' accuracy when predicting the weather? 100%, 70, 30? What's your general success rate on that?
Well, people that use us say we're about 85% correct. Now, these are the farmers who say, well, okay, take a weather period where we said there's going to be, you know, like the end of this month, we said there'll be, you know, heavy rain around and so forth, in places. They say, well, okay, was that generally right or wrong, or was it generally useful to know that, or did in fact the opposite happen? So they say on that basis we're about 85% right.
Right, okay, well that's a good...
Some of the time we're going to be less than that, some of the time more than that. This, if you go on our website, you can see comments on, you can see all the previous forecasts in the forecast archive, and on the latest blog, called the comments blog, my comments blog, there's people, you know, commenting in about what the weather's been doing and saying how good or bad it has been. So you can read that there, and of course you can get forecasts. You know, there's free information as well as you can buy some as well, and we've got a lot of offers there right now for remarkably cheap forecasts. Dare I say it myself?
Brilliant. Okay, and what kind of technology do you use to actually do your forecasting?
Well, we don't use any technology other than, we have a computer and calculators and a pen and pencil and paper and equations. So we work out where to look in the past for things in the future. So we need past weather data, and we have to know where to look. So that is the essential stuff. We do not have a supercomputer, no, and we do not have our own satellites. The American taxpayer is busy paying for those things, looking at the sun all the time, which is useful. We don't use necessarily current solar activity to say anything, because we've already got a prediction of what the sun is going to do long before it does it, essentially, or to be more precise, we predict the effect that is going to happen. But we do monitor what the sun does to see if it's doing what we expected, and then try and understand the details.
Have you seen repetition over the years?
Repetition? Repetition. Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
Well, does that help? Does that,
22-year cycles, 11-year cycles.
Yeah.
The main cycle on the Earth is the 22-year magnetic cycle of the Sun-Earth connections. But the magnetic cycle of the Sun is 22 years, and the activity cycle is 11 years. But the connections between the Sun and the Earth are different every 11 years. So we have a 22-year effect, and the main effective world temperatures, the main variation in world temperatures, apart from the annual temperatures in any locality, is the 22-year signal, i.e. the magnetic cycle of the Sun.
Right, okay. I have another question come in from Steve, my co-host. What is Piers' thoughts on orgone energy and the chembusters, where orgone energy is supposed to be shot up into the clouds to clear the chemtrails?
Oh, I see. This is, what's his name? It's orgone accumulated.
Yeah, it's a Wilhelm Reich.
Wilhelm Reich, that's the one, yeah. I don't know. I've seen these things, and well, it might be nuts or it might not be. I don't know. I don't have a view on it. I mean, he was a very interesting fellow, Wilhelm Reich. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. Well, the documentary is very... I can't say that I can imagine something like that working, but, if there's evidence of that, then I'd like to see it being repeated, under sort of conditions where you can see what's really going on, as opposed to somebody looking at a cloud saying it's going to split, because you look at any cloud long enough, they will split.
Right, okay. Well, there's even been people saying that they've been focusing their own energy to split clouds without even using, chembusters. I remember talking to somebody saying they were able to do that, so they say. But again, it's all about evidence and proof, isn't it? I mean, that's
that's right, evidence. I mean, in the Electric Universe, the conference we went to where I spoke at, and you will see the YouTube on that, was the theme of the conference was evidence. Okay, I mean, this was the idea you've got to have evidence, and they do have experimental evidence for various things, but I haven't seen any experimental evidence for clouds looking like that.
Well, again, it's something that we say over and over again, and open your mind. That look, we're interested in facts, and we're not no interest in conspiracies. But at the same time, if there's no kind of solid facts that we can rely on, then you keep an open mind. You entertain the thought. Unfortunately, there are people out there who don't have that ability. Who if they don't, it doesn't fit into their belief system. They don't have the ability to open their mind, and which is a shame, because it just means they're ignorant. That's
absolutely true. The modern society has a big belief in belief, if you like. What it starts off with is, there's a theory, the theory's right. If there's a fact happening, well, the fact might be wrong. The fact could be wrong, or we'll even change the facts, as the global warmers have done by fiddling temperatures. So, you have to understand that all theories that man has ever had have always been inadequate or incorrect in the long run and had to be changed. So when you hear a theory, it doesn't mean it's the answer. It just means it's a theory.
And have you come across people in... Oh, we have a call coming in. Hang on a minute. We'll try and get the caller in for you. Good evening, caller. Do you have a question for Piers? How are you doing? Patrick, how are you doing?
Yes, I was aware of that. Very interesting.
Okay, Piers.
I don't know what to make of it. Because it might have been something to do with man meddling with something. But the odd thing is that it wasn't talked about on the TV when, actually, something that close to New York, they should have said, hang on, there's something that might hit. I mean, maybe they'd had done their meteorology and it wasn't going to hit. I don't know. But on the other hand, something that close to New York, they should at least be flapping around, and they weren't. Very strange. Yeah. Right. Well, 9/11 isn't what it's made out to be by the US government, that is for sure.
Brilliant. Okay, Patrick, that's great. Thanks for calling in. Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, that was Patrick there calling in. Thanks for the phone call, Patrick. Yeah, I didn't quite... there was a hurricane or something on 9/11?
There was a hurricane off New York, in the sea, which was potentially something that could be dangerous, but it wasn't talked about in the media. I mean, it was on the maps, it was there was something going on. And it's very curious that wasn't talked about on the day of 9/11, when, instead they were just, doing nothing. All of a sudden there's this great event, i.e. this event of the 9/11 towers catching fire and so forth.
Yeah, okay.
So I wasn't attention paid to this thing. I don't know. And I've heard people who know more about it than I do that have asked exactly the same question and shown, pictures and pressure maps to show there was something going on. So the speculation to the effect that somehow this thing was manufactured by humans, right? I've no idea. I don't think it's that easy to make a hurricane at all. You've got to have the conditions present to start with, whether you could even make them go right if the mix was right to start with. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, then again, we don't know the technology they have. We can only surmise what they can do and what they have, because a lot of us, none of us have been privy to that technology, so we can only guess.
Oh. And if there's anything new, it'll leak out eventually. I can't think there's anything the army have got which is fantastically different from what we already have, because there's no secrets around in the long run,
Yeah.
as Edward Snowden showed us, unless he's somebody playing a game anyway. I don't know.
Well, that's another issue with Snowden, because now they're saying that the Russians are kind of getting him to say that he started off being an analyst and now he's a secret agent. So I don't know whether there's a bit of favoritism going on there with the Russians, because the Russians are kind of, having to go at the Americans because of the sanctions being pulled by the Russians. But then again, that could be all a game in itself, just for the media. We don't know.
Putin is playing a big game with his little Russia, or big Russia rather, greater Russia, is for home consumption. Whether he actually wants to take over the whole of Ukraine, I don't know. It's doubtful, because it'd cost him a hell of a lot of money to put the economy right. Like it's going to cost huge amounts to get the Crimea working. It's
yeah, no, it's well. See, there you go. We
evolution on his feet. People say, "Look, you've got us on board, and you've done nothing. We're starving." Well,
Yeah, well, there's so much kind of different takes. We had different opinions on why Putin wants Crimea, because we had Gordon James Gananoto on, and they're saying that because there's going to be air changes going on, massive air changes going on. With this pole shift, I don't know whether you heard about the talk about this pole shift supposed to happen. Yeah. So
I don't think there's a pole shift. These pole shifts take a long time to happen. They don't happen overnight.
Yeah.
We've got thousands of years, and the pole becomes more confused, and you have subpoles and so on, and it goes on, and it will cause weather changes as well, because it has a weaker magnetic field means that the solar particles have more penetration into the atmosphere and so forth.
But what about the likes of where the scientists have found woolly mammoths with food half digested in their stomach? What they're saying is that there must have been something fairly quick to actually freeze them that quick.
Well, yes, we don't know, but if a woolly mammoth falls down a crevasse and he's got a stomach full of food, then he's going to die with the food in him. So I don't know. There's all sorts of reasons why some creature can die suddenly. If they all died at the same time, within an hour of each other, then there'd have to be something pretty catastrophic happening. But
okay, well let's just talk a little bit.
I don't know. You'd have to investigate those sort of claims.
You have to look into it. Well, okay, let's just talk a little bit about the Hollywood thing, and if that's a possibility. The movie The Day After Tomorrow, they talk about this extreme freezing, instant freezing. I mean, is that a possibility, or is that just like Hollywood?
This case Hollywood is complete nonsense.
Right, okay. Well, that's that.
Nonsense. Because it's not possible to extract that amount of heat from the ocean that quickly. It just can't be done. I mean, you think about it. It takes ages for things just to melt or freeze anyway. I mean, just look at Lake Michigan. It's still partly frozen, despite the fact that, been 80 degrees around there. So, you can't get heat in and out of the ocean that quick. No. It's nonsense.
Okay, no, that's no problem. I was just curious because, the way Hollywood ramp things up, and you look at these things, and for people who don't understand the weather, like, totally, you can look at something like that and think, I wonder, is that possible, But one of the things I was going to ask you is about...
They were not possible. They were mixing up a possible sort of cooling effect due to change of circulation and ice melting and coming on the surface, so cold water coming down. But that's going to be cold water coming down, not ice coming down.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're confusing that with a kind of cataclysmic freeze-up, which is physically impossible.
Right, okay. And what about, have you come across, we were just talking about, obviously people being ignorant. Have you come across that in your own industry, where they have such a kind of, a structured belief system that they just, they won't entertain thoughts outside of, what they know in their belief system?
Yeah, there's plenty of people around like that. Far too many people around like that. I mean, it's curious, they're taught in schools, children are taught to, analyse, understand, only accept what they can see as true. But when they get older, the TV and radio tells them stuff which is a pack of lies, and they're told to believe that and not believe any evidence. So there's a lot of contradictions going on. But have I met people who are completely deluded? Yes, I have, yeah. I've met people who, and others have met them as well, where they say, they don't believe our forecast could be done, therefore they're not being done. And they're not even prepared to look at, a forecast and see if it's happened or not. They won't do that. It's a bit like, various extreme religious groups saying, I ain't going to believe that because it's dangerous. I ain't going to read that book because it's dangerous. Well, okay. Don't tell me it's dangerous if you don't know what's in it. I mean, that's all.
Oh yeah, but you get that all the time. You get that all the time. But even, we get it. In the truth movement, we get it as well. We get people that have a very closed mind to things. They're stuck in their belief system. This is why we always say what open your mind is. They're stuck in their belief system, and they just don't have the ability to think outside the box. And that's why I say about the Aristotle. I always kind of use that quote because it explains it perfectly. You don't have to believe it, but entertain the thought and have a think about it.
Yeah, I am, yep.
Yeah, no, sorry, just lost you there for a minute. Okay, tell us, what's the plans for Weather Action? What are your plans for the next few years? What's your aim?
Well, we want to expand. We are expanding to do weather further ahead and for a wider audience. Currently, we do long-range forecasts for Britain, Ireland, Europe, and the US of A. And we do the British Isles ones, can be up to 12 months ahead, but mostly a few months ahead. But we are extending that ahead now, and we are also going to extend ahead for America and Europe.
Okay, and what's your...
We're being requested to do other parts of the world where there's issues of data, but if we can get some financial backing by selling more forecasts, which we're endeavouring to do, then we could get a financial backing from that in order to expand to Australia, South Africa, for example, where we've had a lot of interest.
Yeah, and who's the kind of clients that would actually be going to you? What kind of clients would they be?
Farmers, commodity traders, energy industry, some insurance companies, but mostly the small ones. The big ones are more interested in making money out of scare stories of climate change.
Okay, and is there any story that you come across with a client or an issue that would be kind of, you find entertaining, or something that you think, well, this is a good thing, this is what this happened, or a kind of a gold medal for yourselves for what you did?
Well, I said quite a lot of stuff. I mean, us predicting the floods in 07, 08, 09, and the extremely wet summer of 2012. Those are all very important for agriculture, who planned accordingly, you know. And we've advised people they've got to recognise that growing seasons are generally going to be shorter, and you should maybe think of growing carrots or beetroot or turnips instead of wheat in certain places. And you know, there are some farmers showing signs of doing that, or actually doing that. So in terms of specific stories with clients or whatever, I would say, well, we had a very interesting conversation with some leading insurer, I have to say, which was quite out of this world, because they had funded us to do long-range forecasts. And we did the long-range, we produced long-range forecasts. And then they all merged with each other, and I went back to them and said, well, okay, now we've got the forecast, do you want to buy them at the agreed reduced rate? And the new merger of British insurers said, no, we don't want them. And I said, what? You don't want them? And I said, well, look, you've just got this map of flood risk in Britain, where you can tell people if there's a flood, they're going to be hit or not. But don't you want to know if it actually is going to flood? And he said, no, we don't want to know. No, I thought, what the hell is this? And I got to the bottom of it. Basically, we were on the wrong boat, wrong bus. They don't want to talk to us because we're against man-made climate change. They want to scare people to hell with flood maps and make them buy insurance. And if the public knew that the insurance companies are buying forecasts of us, so they knew, for example, one year it wasn't going to flood, or thought it wasn't going to flood, and they were selling insurance that it would flood, then someone's going to take them to court. So they prefer to make money by climate scares than actually knowing what is going to happen. They do want to know what is going to happen as well, of course, but you see there's a bit of pros and cons about whether the public know that they know.
But how does it work if somebody comes to you to pay you?
Completely true. Whether it's staggering. Not saying all insurers are like that, but you know, basically that is the industry, the insurance industry in Britain today.
But if somebody comes along as a client and they get you to do a forecast and they pay for that, and it doesn't happen the way you say it happens, how does that work out?
Well, they might be annoyed. We say, well, okay, we do warn you, we're not going to be right all the time. And we might give free forecasts, so we do have systems where we've said to people, okay, we have a guarantee, i.e. if we're wrong, then you get your money back, and but they have to pay more to have that sort of service. We've done that. We told people for weddings, we're saying, oh, if you're not satisfied with the wedding forecast, you get your money back. We don't do so many wedding forecasts now anyway, because they're just maybe not interested in it. I don't know why. But we didn't have to give much money back.
Well, that's good. I mean, you do wedding forecasts as well. That's always handy.
It's usually for a weekend, you know. Is it going to be a good weekend, bad weekend? And we've advised some quite, well-known people on these type of things about when they should have a wedding and so forth.
Well, that's handy. And do you do that in Ireland?
Advised her, but we did do forecasts for the royal wedding, and we were very good on that.
Right, okay. And do you do that in Ireland as well, or just the UK?
Oh, yes, Ireland, yeah, no. The forecasts we do are Britain and Ireland. So it's one weather map with, different sections to it, but you can see Britain and Ireland separately marked up, and, often you can have wet weather when we don't get it here. Usually, if it's going to be wet in Britain, it will be wet in Ireland first, but not always. We've had sometimes things coming from the other side, which are very interesting and happening recently. No, they go together. The Irish forecasts have been pretty accurate as the British ones.
Right, okay. Well, that's...
the website, have a look, weatheraction.com. You can see examples, and I've got a little bit of chat there now on what's happening with the weather right now, which is interesting. I mean, this June is going to have an interesting situation of fluctuations of quite quiet weather, and all of a sudden it's then going to get suddenly big storms or whatever, just out of the blue. Like big contrasts through the month.
Right, okay.
Britain, Ireland, America, all over, and huge variations in the jet stream. Great big swings of it going.
Okay, so variations meaning, is it going to be sunny? Is it going to be raining?
Well, be both. But I mean, general. June is going to decline. The first half of June will be better generally than the second half. But get on there and see more about it.
Right. So and you put the forecast on your website. So just
you can buy a detailed one, but we have various bits of chit chat there anyway.
Right, okay, brilliant. Okay, well listen, we've reached that time of the evening, and listen, thanks a lot for coming on the show, much appreciated. Just give out your website and any details that you want to give out there to our listeners.
It's www.weatheraction.com, and click on there, you can go to the latest comments blog, and that'll, you'll get a lot of information there. Or on Twitter, I'm at Piers_Corbyn, and it's spelled Corbyn. And I'm also on Facebook, again, under Piers Corbyn.
Brilliant. Okay, well, Piers, thanks a lot for coming on. Just stay with us there. We're just going to go off to a musical break, and we'll be back after this. Okay, that's Patience, and Take That. Good song there. Big thanks to Piers Corbyn for coming on the show and filling us in all about Weather Action and what he does. And he's going to put us on the mailing list just to kind of keep us up to date on what's going on. So we'll find out exactly. We'll have our finger on the pulse. We have a few minutes left on the show. As we say, Steve he's not on the show, unfortunately. He's left holding the baby. I know he's probably listening into the show at the moment. He's on the chat room there. Good evening, Steve. Hope everything's going okay your end. So just for the people who kind of tuned in late to the show, just a few things I mentioned at the start of the show there, that over here in Galway in Ireland there was 5 suicides over the last weekend, and it's just bad to hear that things like that are happening and still happening. And of course, with all the taxes coming out and water meters, and now they're going to be talking about sewage charges, and God knows what other taxes they're going to come out with. I don't know. We'll have to see what we can do. It's going to be a people's vote. It's going to be. It has to happen, because it just can't keep on going on like this. The other thing that we talked about was obviously the land registry, and I'm going to see if I can find out during the week what their definition is of boundary. So they say your property goes out to a certain amount, and then does the boundary goes out to halfway across the road. So, does that mean that we're covered? Does it come under our remit, or does it come under the remit of the council or whatever? I don't know. So I'm going to see if I can ring Land Registry during the week and just ask them and get a definition of what they mean by the boundary. And again, I'll record it. I don't have the recording lined up again, this week for the Land Registry, but I'll have to put that up there. And just a quick note, John Moore Show, Liberty Man, go on YouTube, listen to John Moore. He was on OYM last year, and we're going to get him on again. I think we'll get him on again this year if we can track him down and get him on and get an update on what he thinks is going on. But he apparently, an insider said that there's going to be Department of Defense in the US is frantically getting ready for an EMP attack on the continental US. That's what he's saying. Whether you believe that or not, that's up to you. You can go and check it out and listen to his show and see what you think yourself. Now, as I said, during the week, I met up with Tony Farrell, who was the South Yorkshire intelligence analyst, the whistleblower, and Muddeeb, which is John Anthony Hill. John Anthony Hill was the chap who did the 7/7 Ripple Effect DVD, and he sent it over to a judge over in the UK, and basically they extradited him over to the UK, locked him up under house arrest. Well, he locked him up for 100 days, I think, and then he put him under house arrest. And John actually came on the show, Muddeeb came on our show while he was under house arrest, and we were talking to him. That show's available to download and listen to. But I met up with Tony and Muddeeb, and we had a brilliant chat, great information. We talked to each other about loads of things, loads of different areas, again opening our mind to a lot of things. And one of the things that Muddeeb said to me, and I thought was quite poignant, I actually put it up on the Facebook page, and he said that what our path in life is. And he said our path in life is to move away from ego and ignorance and move towards humility and wisdom. And if you think about that, I mean, it's very spot on. I think he's spot on there. Unfortunately, there are people in this world who'll never move away from ego and definitely will never move away from ignorance. And that's just the way they are. They're stuck in their belief system. So, that's just their life. Maybe in the next life, maybe that's what they'll do. Maybe they'll wake up to what's going on. But at the moment, ego and ignorance is probably their companion. But we had some great information, and we talked about a few things. Really got to do with just the whole kind of attitude of people, the whole belief system. You know, we are talking about spiritual stuff, you know, service to self, service to others, as just people out there who are just, you know, completely selfish. Yeah, and we always say Ireland, if begrudgery was an Olympic sport in Ireland, we'd win it every time, and we get that, you know, there's always begrudgery, but I always refer back to the joke about the chap, the American chap catching the lobsters, which I've said before on the show, and that's the way it is, and we need to get out of this cycle. I do think that we need to really get out of this cycle and move ahead, but some people just don't get it, and that's just the way it is. So you just have to leave them, let them get on with it, you know, fight their own conscience, whatever they need to do. Right, okay, next week we're going to have on Dr. Dean Lloyd and Am Rosen. Now, Dr. Dean Lloyd and Am Rosen are normally, they have a regular spot on United We Strike, and I'm going to get them on to talk about marijuana and hemp. The reason being is because I had a good debate with somebody. I'd call it a debate. Some people might call it an argument. And we were talking about the benefits of hemp. Well, you know, what Ricky Simpson does, basically. And this person obviously was very passionate about the whole addiction thing and drugs and the whole lot. And drugs shouldn't be made legal. And I kind of said, well, there's two, you know, to be honest with you, I'm not really concerned about the use of marijuana for personal use and smoking. I'm more concerned about the legalization for medical purposes to cure cancer. That's what my interest would be really interested in, legalizing the hemp oil or the hemp for, you know, for medical reasons, medicinal reasons. And apparently there is kind of industrial hemp is different. When we talked to Dr. Rima when she was on the show, industrial hemp is different to the strains of marijuana that you get out on the street, so to speak. And the industrial hemp seems to have, or obviously has more CBD in it, where the strains out on the street with marijuana have more THC in it, which is the high. You get the high from. But to clarify the whole issue, and to understand it a bit more, I thought, you know, especially the whole addiction thing. Now, we did get an email from somebody during the week who said to us that they were an expert in addiction and they could help people who are, you know, in an addiction of some sort. So maybe that's the person we might get on the show to actually talk about that. But the whole idea of Dean Lloyd and Am Rosen coming on is purely to talk about the benefits and the pros and cons of both and the whole addiction thing. And because I think that has to be answered. I think there are people there, they're saying that if you're a teenager and you get into smoking cannabis or get into smoking marijuana, then you can be affected from that from a psychological level, psychotic episodes. It can mentally affect you. So, and that was their concern. So because they seen that, they said, well, that's a no. And I said, well, you know, to this person, well, if you ban marijuana, if you make it illegal, as it is at the moment, then you get people who are addicted to chocolate, you get people addicted to cigarettes, you get people addicted to drink. So we just have to kind of make everything illegal, so nobody can have anything. It'd be like a Puritan society where, you know, laughing is a sin and, you know, drinking is a sin and everything else. So, and that's kind of how the Puritans were. Everything was a sin. So I thought it would be a good idea to get the boys on and talk about it. So that's the plan for next week. We do have another few guests coming up on our schedule as well. James Gilliland is booked in as well to come on the show. Really looking forward to that. He's going to hopefully come on and hopefully open a few minds. I know there's people out there that, you know, it's impossible for their minds to be open. It's just they're a closed shop and that's it. They see what they see. They're stuck in their belief system and that's the way it is. And myself and Steve have talked about the fluid belief system over and over again. And Mark Pazio was on the show and he talked about the similar thing. He didn't call it a fluid belief system, but he had a similar system and he said the same thing. So you just have to feel sorry for these people. I think that's just, you know, that's what you know, that's the only thing that you can do, you know. Yeah, basically, you know, we'll have to when we get James on, that would be a good show. Okay, well listen, I'm going to finish up a little bit early, but I'm going to finish up. I'd like to, a big thanks. I don't know who's on with Vin after the show, but I'm sure it's going to be a good show. A big thanks to Vin for helping us to help one of our listeners during the week. I'm sure he went off as a happy camper. And, thanks for doing that, Vin. As I say, I don't know who's up next, but we'll pass it off to Vin. Steve, we'll probably see you next week. I'm sure, fingers crossed, you'll be here. You'll have a chance to leave the baby at home next time. And I hope you tuned into the show. I hope you liked the content anyway from Piers Corbyn. And a big thank you for everybody that tuned in. Stay safe, take it easy, have a good week, and have a good weekend. And we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.